Sheriff Frank Mason never thought he would live in Pinewood Estates. After working 15 years in Evergreen County, he had become county sheriff because he was tough, honest, and fair. The fancy neighborhood with perfect lawns and similar houses was not his style. But his daughter's health made him change his mind. Lily Mason was 17 years old. 3 years ago, doctors told her she had a rare muscle disease that would get worse over time. The doctors at Evergreen Medical Center said a one-floor house would be better for her as her legs got weaker. When a small ranch house became available in Pinewood Estates just 5 minutes from the hospital, Frank decided to buy it. "Dad, are you sure about this place?" Lily asked from her wheelchair as they drove up to their new house. "Everyone here looks so stuck up." Frank smiled at his daughter. Even with all her health problems, Lily was still smart and noticed everything around her. "It's closer to your doctor's, honey, and the school has that science program you like." Frank did not tell her about the very high HOA fees he now had to pay, or the 16 pages of rules he had to sign. As a single dad who had spent his life working in law enforcement, he hated dealing with too many rules. But for Lily, he would put up with anything. "And don't worry," he added, parking his work SUV in the driveway. "We're keeping our cabin by the lake. We can go there on weekends when you want to get away from here." Lily's face lit up. "You promise?" "Sheriff's honor," Frank said, raising his hand like he was making an official oath. This made Lily laugh. They did not see the window curtains moving in the house across the street. They did not notice their new neighbor, Patricia Winters, the president of the Pinewood Estates HOA board, watching them with an angry look as workers installed a wheelchair ramp at their front door. Frank spent the next few days setting up their new home. He put Lily's room close to the bathroom to make things easier for her. He made sure all doorways were wide enough for her wheelchair. He hung her science awards and photos of their camping trips on the walls to make the new place feel like home. "It's not so bad," Lily admitted on their third night as they ate pizza on the back patio. "It's quiet, at least." "Too quiet," Frank joked. "I keep expecting someone to commit a crime just to give me something to do." Lily rolled her eyes. "Dad, you're the sheriff. You're supposed to prevent crimes, not hope for them." I know. He laughed. "Just making sure you remember what I do for a living." The peaceful evening was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. Frank opened it to find a thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a blue pantsuit and held a clipboard. "Good evening," she said without smiling. "I'm Patricia Winters, Pinewood Estates HOA president. I notice you've made exterior modifications without board approval." Frank kept his face friendly even though he felt annoyed. "Hello, Ms. Winters. I'm Frank Mason. The modification you're referring to is a wheelchair ramp for my daughter." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Regardless of purpose, all exterior changes must be approved before installation. It's in the covenant you signed." She handed him a paper. "This is a notice of violation. You'll need to submit proper paperwork at the next board meeting." Frank took the paper and stayed calm. In his years of police work, he had learned that getting angry never solved problems. "I understand. When is the next meeting?" "Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the community center," Patricia said. She looked past him into the house. "I also notice you have a second vehicle on the property. Our rules clearly state that all cars must be garage kept when not in use." "That's my daughter's car," Frank explained. "It has special controls so she can learn to drive with her condition. The garage is too narrow for both vehicles." Patricia's face showed no sympathy. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mason. Either move it to the garage or request a variance. Otherwise, fines begin at $100 per day." She turned to leave, then added, "And your grass is a 1/4 inch too high. I suggest you mow it tomorrow." As she walked away, Frank closed the door slowly rather than slamming it like he wanted to. He had dealt with drug dealers and violent criminals who showed more kindness than this woman. "Who was that?" Lily called from the living room. "Just a neighbor welcoming us to the area," Frank lied, not wanting to worry her. He tucked the violation notice into his pocket. That night, after Lily went to bed, Frank sat on the porch looking at the perfect houses around him. He had faced armed suspects and dangerous situations without fear, But something about this neighborhood made him uneasy. It felt like the calm before a storm. His phone rang. It was the night deputy. "Sorry to bother you, Sheriff," the deputy said. "We've got a situation at the old mill. Some kids broke in and one of them fell through the floor. Rescue team is on the way, but I thought you should know." "I'll be right there," Frank said, already heading inside to change. As he left a note for Lily and grabbed his keys, Frank looked across the street. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see Patricia Winters watching his house. He nodded at her, but she let the curtain fall without responding. Frank had a feeling that moving to Pinewood Estates was going to be more challenging than any case he had worked on. But he was the county sheriff, and if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was to uphold what was right, even against people who hid behind rule books instead of guns. For Lily, he would face whatever came, even if that meant going to war with the HOA. 3 weeks passed since Frank and Lily moved to Pinewood Estates. They were getting used to their new routine. Frank's work was understanding about his need to be near home, so he arranged his schedule to take Lily to school before going to the sheriff's office. But today was different. An early morning emergency call forced him to leave before the sun came up. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" Frank asked Lily, who was still half asleep. "Dad, I'm 17, not 7, she mumbled into her pillow. "I can get ready by myself and call the special bus service." Frank left with worry in his heart. He changed, from regular clothes into his uniform at the station. The county sent him to handle a big car crash on the highway. After that, he had to fill out many forms that kept him at work long after dinner time. When he finally got home, tired and still in his uniform, he found Lily crying at the kitchen table. She held a crumpled pink paper in her hand. "What happened?" Frank asked, quickly moving to her side. "That woman," Lily said, pushing the paper toward him. "She left this on my car while I was at school. Then she waited for me when I got home." Frank smoothed out the paper. It was an HOA violation notice about unauthorized vehicles stored on property. According to the notice, Lily's specially changed car, adapted with hand controls so she could learn to drive by herself, was breaking Pinewood Estates rules that said unused vehicles could not be seen on properties. "Did you tell her it's your car? That you're learning to drive it?" Frank asked quietly. He felt a calmness come over him, the same calmness that came before he dealt with criminals in the questioning room. "I tried," Lily said, wiping her eyes. She said, and I'm telling you exactly what she said. "I don't care if you're disabled, rules are rules. Either move it to the garage or pay fines. Your sad story doesn't let you break community standards." Frank took a deep breath. "Did she really say that?" "That's not all," Lily continued. "She said we should have asked permission before putting in the wheelchair ramp, and that the HOA board would be talking about our many violations at tomorrow's meeting." Frank put the notice on the table and sat beside his daughter. "Lily, what do I always say about bullies?" A small smile appeared on Lily's face. "They only have the power you give them." "That's right," Frank nodded. "And tomorrow Ms. HOA Patricia is going to learn that lesson firsthand." The next morning, Frank called his office. "Sam, I need you to cover the evening shift for me today. I have to attend an HOA meeting." "No problem, Sheriff," Sam replied. "Everything okay?" "It will be," Frank said with determination in his voice. "I just need to explain some federal laws to certain people." Frank spent the day gathering information. He read through the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. He called 2 lawyers he knew from past cases. By afternoon, he had a folder filled with printed laws, court cases, and a list of HOA violations against disabled residents. "Dad, you don't have to fight this battle," Lily said as she watched him prepare. "We could just move the car." Frank looked up from his papers. "Sweetheart, there are 2 kinds of fights in this world. The ones we choose, and the ones that choose us. When someone picks on my daughter because of her disability, that fight just chose me." Lily rolled her eyes but smiled. "You're so dramatic sometimes." "I learned it from watching your theater performances," he teased back. At 6:45 that evening, Frank changed into plain clothes, jeans, and a simple button-down shirt. He didn't want his uniform to seem threatening. This wasn't about his job as sheriff. This was about being a father and a citizen who understood the law. "I'm heading out," he told Lily. "Want to come?" Lily shook her head. "I have a video chat with my science club at 7:30. Besides, I trust you to handle it." "Okay, but I'm bringing your car paperwork to show it's legally registered to you," Frank said. "Go get him, Dad," Lily encouraged. The Pinewood Estates Community Center was packed when Frank arrived. He slipped into a seat in the back row. Patricia Winters stood at the front, running the meeting with a voice that showed she loved being in charge. She went through several items before reaching the one Frank was waiting for. Item 4 on today's list, the unauthorized vehicle at 1842 Pinewood Drive, Patricia announced to the room of 30 homeowners. Despite our clear rules saying unused cars cannot be stored where people can see them, the Masons have refused to follow our notices. Frank stayed quiet in his seat. Furthermore, Patricia continued with a voice that sounded both rude and bossy, "They put in outside changes without board approval. I suggest we start the formal citation process, which, as you all know, starts at $100 per day per violation." People in the room began to whisper. An older man in the second row raised his hand. "Patricia, isn't that the home with the disabled teenager? Surely we can make an exception." "Rules exist for a reason, Harold." Patricia cut him off. "If we make one exception, soon everyone will want special treatment. Property values will drop. Is that what you want?" Frank stood up slowly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying the power that had made witnesses confess and criminals rethink their choices. "May I speak to the board about this issue?" Patricia looked over her reading glasses. "You're the father, I assume?" "Mr. Mason, this isn't a debate. The rules clearly state—" "Sheriff?" Frank corrected her politely. "Sheriff Frank Mason, Evergreen County. And before you continue, I'd like to explain a few things." The room went completely silent. Patricia's face showed surprise, then worry, then anger. She clearly hadn't known Frank was the county sheriff. The power balance in the room shifted as Frank walked to the front, carrying his folder of documents. "I believe we need to discuss the Fair Housing Act," Frank began, "particularly the sections about reasonable accommodations for disabled residents." The room stayed silent as Frank stood at the front. Everyone watched him closely. Patricia's face turned red as she realized she had been talking down to the county sheriff. "That car belongs to my daughter Lily," Frank explained in a calm voice. "It has special changes so she can drive despite her muscle disease. It's not unused, it's her path to freedom. The ramp you don't like? That's what lets my daughter leave our home instead of being stuck inside." Frank opened his folder and took out some papers. "I did some research after getting your notice. According to the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, homeowners associations cannot enforce rules that stop disabled residents from having what they need to live normally." He turned to face everyone in the room. "I didn't want our first meeting with neighbors to be like this. I hoped for welcome baskets, not violation notices. But since we're here, let me be clear. Threatening a disabled teenager with daily fines for things protected by federal law isn't just wrong. It's against the law." Patricia's face grew even redder. "You can't just come in here and—" "I'm not done," Frank said, his voice never getting louder but somehow filling the room completely. "As county sheriff, I've seen what happens when people misuse power. Usually, I would handle this through proper channels, file complaints with housing authorities, contact the state office about unfair treatment. But since my daughter was crying yesterday, I'm feeling more direct." He put his folder on the table. "This has papers showing 5 other complaints against this HOA board for similar treatment of disabled people in the past 3 years. I've also talked to those homeowners. They're very interested in joining together for a group lawsuit." No one in the room made a sound. Patricia tried to keep her control. "Sheriff or not, the rules of Pinewood Estates clearly state federal law beats HOA rules every time," Frank cut in. "And federal law says you must make reasonable changes for disabled residents. My daughter's car and ramp are both reasonable needs." An older woman in the front row raised her hand. "I didn't know about these other complaints, Patricia. You told There were no legal issues with the board. More people began to talk, their voices showing surprise and anger. Harold, the older man who had spoken earlier, stood up. I move that we immediately stop any fines against the Mason property and review our rules regarding disabled residents. You can't just... Patricia started. I second the motion, another woman called out. All in favor? Harold asked the room. Almost. Every hand went up. Patricia looked around, her face showing shock. This is not how we run meetings. There's a process. The process just happened, Frank said quietly. Democracy in action. It's a beautiful thing. Harold walked to the front. I think we should also schedule a special meeting to review Patricia's leadership. All those in favor? Again, most hands went up. Patricia gathered her papers with shaking hands. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, but no one was listening to her anymore. As people began to talk among themselves, several neighbors came up to Frank. I'm sorry about all this, said a woman with gray hair. I'm Carol from 2 Doors. Down from you. We should have spoken up sooner. Patricia has been running this place like her own little kingdom for years, added a man in a blue sweater. Nobody wanted to be her next target. Frank nodded, understanding their fear but not sharing it. In his job, he had faced armed criminals and dangerous situations. An angry HOA president seemed small in comparison. If you have time this weekend, Carol said, we're having a small barbecue. You and your daughter should come. We'd love to properly welcome you to the neighborhood. Thank you, Frank said, feeling some hope for their new home. I think Lily would like that. On his way out, Frank passed Patricia in the parking lot. She stood by her car, talking angrily on her phone. This isn't over, she said when she saw him. You might think you've won, but I've run this HOA for 8 years. People always forget these little rebellions. Frank stopped and looked at her. Ms. Winters, in my line of work, I meet all kinds of people who break rules. Most do it because they're desperate or made a mistake. But some do it because they think rules don't apply to them. He stepped closer, his voice staying professional. The difference is that the first group usually learns their lesson. The second group ends up with legal problems. I hope you're in the first group. Patricia's face showed both anger and fear. Are you threatening me, Sheriff? Not at all, Franco replied. Just giving friendly advice neighbor to neighbor. Have a good evening. As Frank drove home, he felt tired but satisfied. The fight wasn't over, but the first battle had gone well. He thought about what to tell Lily. He wanted her to know that standing up for yourself worked, but he didn't want her to worry about neighborhood drama. When he walked inside, he found Lily in the living room, finishing her video chat with her science club. How did it go? She asked after saying goodbye to her friends. Frank smiled. Let's just say the HOA board is reconsidering their position. Dad, Lily said with a knowing look, what exactly did you do? I simply explained federal disability law, Frank said, trying to look innocent. Lily raised an eyebrow. And did you happen to mention your job? Frank laughed. It might have come up. Sheriff Dad saves the day, Lily said, shaking her head with a smile. Classic. Actually, Frank said, sitting next to her, we got invited to a barbecue this weekend. Carol from down the street. Seems like not everyone in Pinewood Estates follows Patricia's rules. A neighborhood barbecue? Lily looked surprised. That sounds so normal. I know, Frank agreed. Almost like we're regular people and not outlaws breaking HOA rules. They both laughed, and for the first time since moving in, their house felt a little more like home. Later that night, as Frank checked the locks before bed, a habit from years in law enforcement, he looked out the window. Across the street, Patricia's house was dark except for a single light in an upstairs window. He could see her shadow moving back and forth like she was pacing. Frank knew from experience that people like Patricia didn't give up easily. This was just the beginning of their battle, not the end. But he had faced worse odds before. And this time he was fighting for something more important than just law and order. He was fighting for his daughter's right to live with dignity. Whatever came next, Frank Mason was ready. 2 days after the HOA meeting, Frank received a phone call from Harold Bennett, the older man who had spoken up for them. "Sheriff Mason, I wanted to let you know that we've called a special meeting for tomorrow night," Harold said. "The board will vote on new leadership and review the HOA rules about accommodations for disabled residents." "That was quick," Frank said, surprised at how fast things were moving. "Well, after you left, several people stayed behind to talk. Turns out many folks have been unhappy with Patricia for years, but were too scared to say anything. Your stand at the meeting gave people courage." Frank thanked Harold for the information. When he hung up, Lily wheeled into the kitchen. "Good news?" she asked, seeing her dad smile. "Looks like the HOA might be getting new leadership," Frank told her. "Harold Bennett called about a special meeting tomorrow night." Lily grinned. "Does this mean I get to keep my car in the driveway?" "Think so." Frank nodded. "And maybe we'll have more reasonable neighbors, too." The next day, Frank was at work when his phone rang. It was Sam, his deputy. "Sheriff, you might want to know that Patricia Winters came into the station this morning," Sam said. Frank sat up straighter in his chair. "What did she want?" "She tried to file a harassment complaint against you," Sam explained. "Said you were using your position to bully her and the HOA board." Frank sighed. "What happened?" "I explained that disagreeing with someone at a public meeting isn't harassment," Sam said with a laugh in his voice. "And I might have mentioned that making false complaints could lead to her own legal troubles." "Thanks, Sam," Frank said. "I should have known she wouldn't give up easily." That evening, Frank decided to attend the special HOA meeting. This time he asked Lily if she wanted to come. "I should probably see this place that caused so much trouble," Lily said as they drove to the community center. When they arrived, the parking lot was full. Inside, more people had shown up than at the regular meeting. Frank saw Patricia sitting alone in the front row, her back stiff with anger. Harold called the meeting to order. "First item on our agenda is to vote on the HOA board leadership," he announced. "We have a motion to remove Patricia Winters as president due to her handling of disability accommodation issues and other complaints from residents." Patricia jumped to her feet. "This is completely unfair. I've kept property values high in this neighborhood for 8 years. Without strict rule enforcement, this place will fall apart." An older woman stood up from the crowd. "Patricia, my grandson, couldn't visit me last Christmas because you wouldn't allow a temporary ramp for his wheelchair. You said it would lower the neighborhood standards. That's not about property values. That's just being cruel." More people began to share stories. A man told how Patricia had fined him for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight, when his wife was in labor. A woman described getting violation notices when she was recovering from surgery and couldn't mow her lawn for 2 weeks. Lily leaned over to her dad. "I didn't realize so many people had problems with her." Frank nodded. "Sometimes people in power forget that rules should help people, not hurt them." Harold called for the vote. "All in favor of removing Patricia Winters as HOA president, raise your hand." Almost every hand in the room went up. The vote wasn't even close. By clear majority, Patricia Winters is removed as president, Harold announced. "I nominate Carol Hudson for interim president until our regular elections next month." Carol, the nice woman who had invited Frank and Lily to her barbecue, looked surprised. "Me? I've never been on the board before." "That's exactly why you'd be good at it," someone called out. "You're fair and you listen to people." The vote for Carol passed easily. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. As she passed Frank and Lily, she stopped. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You've turned everyone against me, but they'll see what happens when rules aren't enforced. Wait until people start painting their houses purple and parking boats in their front yards." Lily looked up at her. "Would purple houses and boats really be worse than making disabled people feel unwelcome?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. She had no answer for the simple question. Finally, she walked away without another word. After the meeting, many neighbors came to introduce themselves to Frank and Lily. People who had never spoken during Patricia's leadership now smiled and welcomed them to the neighborhood. "I'm sorry we didn't meet under better circumstances," Carol said as she shook Frank's hand. "But I think things will be different now. Our first order of business is to review all the rules and make sure they're fair for everyone." On the drive home, Lily seemed thoughtful. Dad, do you think Patricia will really cause more trouble? Frank considered the question. People who lose power sometimes fight hard to get it back, but I don't think she has much support left in the neighborhood. I hope she just accepts it and moves on, Lily said. But Frank knew better. In his years as sheriff, he had seen how people like Patricia operated. They didn't give up easily, especially when their pride was hurt. His instincts proved right the very next morning. When he went outside to get the newspaper, he found every single flower in their front garden had been cut down overnight. The beautiful plants that Lily had helped choose and plant were now just stumps in the dirt. Frank looked across the street. Patricia's curtains were closed, but he was certain she was watching. He picked up what remained of a rose bush that Lily had especially loved. He could have gone across the street right then. He could have confronted Patricia. As sheriff, he could have even questioned her officially about destruction of property. Instead, he went inside and called Sam. I need a favor, Frank told his deputy. Can you bring over those extra rose bushes from the station garden project? And maybe ask Carol from community outreach to spread the word that the new family at Pinewood Estates could use some help replanting their garden. By that afternoon, a dozen neighbors had shown up with flowers, plants, and gardening tools. What Patricia had meant as an act of revenge turned into a neighborhood planting party. Carol brought cookies, someone else brought lemonade, and by evening, the Masons' front garden looked better than before. As people worked together, they shared stories and laughed. Lily moved among them in her wheelchair, directing where plants should go and making new friends. Frank watched it all with a smile. Patricia had tried to hurt them, but had only brought the community together instead. Across the street, Patricia's curtains remained closed all day. 3 months passed since the garden planting party. Summer turned to fall, and Pinewood Estates changed in many ways. Under Carol's leadership, the HOA became friendly instead of strict. The focus shifted from punishing rule breakers to building a better community. One cool Saturday morning, Frank sat on his front porch drinking coffee. He watched as Lily practiced driving her special car in the driveway. She had gotten her learner's permit last week and was eager to master the hand controls. Looking good, Lily, Frank called as she successfully backed up and parked. Lily grinned and gave him a thumbs up. Her confidence had grown so much since they moved in. Despite the rough start, Pinewood Estates had become a place where she felt she belonged. Frank spotted Harold walking his dog across the street. The older man waved and came over. Morning, Sheriff, Harold said. Lily's getting good with that car. She practices every chance she gets, Frank replied. The driving instructor says she's almost ready for her road test. Harold nodded toward the house across the street. Have you heard the news? Patricia's place just went on the market yesterday. Frank raised his eyebrows. Really? She's moving? Seems that way, Harold said. Carol heard she bought a condo downtown. No HOA there. They both chuckled at the irony. The woman who had used HOA rules like weapons was now choosing to live somewhere without them. How are the new rules working out? Frank asked. Harold had been helping Carol update the community guidelines. Much better, Harold said. We simplified everything. Basic rules for safety and cleanliness, but none of the nitpicky stuff Patricia loved, and we added clear guidelines for disability accommodations. Frank nodded with approval. That's how it should be. Later that day, Frank and Lily went to the community center for the neighborhood's first fall festival. Carol and the new board had organized games, food, and activities for all ages and abilities. The community center looked different now. Before, it had been mostly empty except for boring meetings. Now it was full of life. Tables with food lined one wall. Children played. Games in the corner. A group of teenagers, including some of Lily's new friends, had set up a video game tournament. Sheriff Mason. Lily, Carol called, waving them over. I'm so glad you could make it. This is amazing, Frank said, looking around at the decorated hall. You've done a great job, Carol smiled. It's been a team effort. Oh, Lily, some of your science club friends are setting up a demonstration table. They were asking for you. Lily wheeled off to find her friends, leaving Frank to talk with the adults. I heard Patricia is moving, Frank said to Carol. Carol nodded. Yes, she's leaving next week. Honestly, it's probably for the best. She hasn't spoken to anyone since the vote, just stays inside with her curtains closed. Frank felt a little sad about that. He never wanted to force Patricia out of her home. He had only wanted fair treatment for his daughter. Sometimes people can't accept when things change, Carol said, as if reading his thoughts. Patricia ran this place her way for so long she couldn't imagine it working any other way. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Everyone turned to look. Patricia Winters stood in the doorway wearing her usual stiff formal clothes. The room went quiet as she walked in, her back straight, her face showing no emotion. She walked directly to Frank. Sheriff Mason, may I speak? With you? Frank nodded, surprised. They moved to a quiet corner of the room. I wanted to tell you personally that I'm moving next week, Patricia said, her voice tight but controlled. So I heard, Frank replied. Downtown, right? Yes. A fresh start. She paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I also wanted to apologize for the garden incident. It was childish and wrong. Frank hadn't expected an apology. Thank you for saying that. Patricia looked around the community center. They seemed to like the new way of doing things. Change can be good, Frank said carefully. People want to feel like they belong, not just that they follow rules. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. I always thought strict rules kept our property values high. That was my job as president. Rules matter, Frank agreed. But so does how we treat each other. An awkward silence fell between them. Is there anything I can do to help with your move? Frank finally asked. Patricia looked surprised by the offer. No, but thank you for asking. She turned to leave, then stopped. Your daughter, is she doing well with her driving? Very well, Frank said. She'll be taking her test soon. Patricia nodded. Good, that's good. She seemed to want to say more, but instead turned and walked toward the exit. As she reached the door, Lily wheeled up to her. Frank couldn't hear what his daughter said, but he saw Patricia's face soften slightly as they spoke. After a brief conversation, Patricia left. Lily returned to her father. What did she want? To say goodbye, I think, Frank answered. What did you say to her? I just wished her good luck in her new place, Lily said with a shrug, and I thanked her. Thanked her? Frank was confused. For what? Lily smiled. For bringing us closer to our neighbors. If she hadn't been so mean about my car and ramp, we might never have met everyone. Frank laughed and shook his head at his daughter's wisdom. Leave it to Lily to find the good in a bad situation. The festival continued into the evening. Frank watched as his daughter played games with her new friends. He chatted with neighbors who had become real friends over the past months. The community that had once seemed cold and unwelcoming now felt like home. A week later, Frank noticed a moving truck in front of Patricia's house. As workers carried furniture out, Patricia stood supervising on the sidewalk. Frank walked across the street. Moving day, he said as a greeting. Patricia nodded. Yes, the new owners move in next week. A family with young twins. I'm sure they'll be welcomed, Frank said. Patricia gave him a small smile, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I'm sure they will. This neighborhood has changed. For the better, I hope, Frank said. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Perhaps. It's just different than what I was used to. She paused. Take care, Sheriff Mason. You too, Ms. Winters. As Frank walked back to his house, he saw Lily watching from the porch. He sat beside her in the rocking chair Carol had given them as a late welcome gift. So she's really leaving, Lily said. Everyone moves on eventually, Frank replied. Lily looked thoughtful. You know what's funny, Dad? We moved here because it was close to the hospital, but I haven't needed to go there in months. My new doctor says my condition is stabilizing. Frank put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. That's great news, Lily. I think it's because I'm happier, she said. I have friends, my science club, my driving. I don't feel stuck anymore. Frank looked around at their neighborhood. Children rode bikes on the sidewalk. A couple walked their dog across the street. Harold waved from his garden. I have a confession, Frank said. I hated this place when we first moved in. All the rules, the perfect lawns. It didn't feel real. And now? Lily asked. Frank smiled. Now it feels like home. Not because of the houses or the rules, but because of the people. Even Patricia? Lily teased. Even Patricia, Frank agreed. Sometimes the most difficult people teach us the most important lessons. As the moving truck drove away from Patricia's empty house, Frank thought about how one person standing up for what's right can change an entire community. He hadn't meant to start a neighborhood revolution. He had only wanted to protect his daughter. But sometimes that's all it takes to make the world a little better. One person refusing to back down when something isn't right.